If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there.
Howard Stern's been doing this forever, and far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to a live recording of the Shrink Tank Podcast at the 2018 Heroes Con in downtown Charlotte. I'm Dave Verhagen. Normally, I'm anchoring the podcast from Nashville, Tennessee, but I flew back to this city that I called home for 24 years to be with you fine folks and to hang out with the rest of our Shrink Tank panel. So let me introduce them. She's a psychologist, a fan of The Bachelor or Bachelorette.
Sadly.
She's an actual girl at Heroes Con. She survived cancer, an apartment fire, an earthquake, and a broken engagement. All that's true. Let's hear it for the next president of these United States, Dr. Emma Kate Wright, everybody.
Hello. Hi. Yes, all of those things are true, unfortunately.
Did they all happen last night?
No.
Okay.
For a series of years. But.
And he's a psychologist, a national expert on Asperger's, the co-author of the popular Max Gamer graphic novel, and the winner of season 26 of Dancing with the Stars. Please welcome Dr. Frank Gaskell, everybody.
Thank you very much, David.
And he's a licensed professional counselor, a substance abuse expert, and the author of several book chapters. He's also our certified Asian. And he's number 3 on the FBI's most wanted list. Give it up for Jonathan Hedderly.
Thank you. Dave, whenever you say I'm a substance abuse expert, it's very confusing whether
No,
that's
it's not.
my professional training or my personal time.
Or a little bit of both.
Or a little bit of both.
All right, today we're here to talk about the psychology of Westworld. There's plenty to talk about, but before we get into the meaty stuff, let me ask each of you guys, if you could vacation in any of the parks, it could be Westworld, it could be Shogun World, Raj World, and there's a couple others that we don't know for sure, like Medieval World, Roman World, those kinds of things might be coming. Or you could even create your own park. Where would you want to vacation? Emma Kate.
Well, the park that I would want to go to is already in creation. It's called Harry Potter World. But if I was to think of a Westworld park, I probably would go to Shogun, the Asian, because I've always wanted to go to Asia, and I've never been there.
Frank.
If there's a space world, I'd go there, but not Shogun World because of, sharp objects.
Right, knives and
Westworld,
swords.
no running toilets. So if there's Roman World, I'd probably go there because I think they had toilets.
Via the space elevator?
Don't start.
Space elevator?
I thought you'd want to go to Friend World where people were friendly to you.
Jonathan.
Well, I would like to go to Frank's World. It's called White Privilege World. It's where it's like you buy yourself out of any trouble and problem. It's fabulous. No, but I actually love Westerns, so the idea of Westworld is really cool. But I also, not Shogun World, but like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, China World, where I could float and fly. That would be really cool. I'd go for that.
Dave, I would like to see Hedderly in the internment camp world. I'm just letting you know that.
Too far.
Where's the line? All right, let's start off by talking about the psychology of Westworld by asking you guys what character fascinates you the most in the TV series psychologically. What character are you really connected with or really fascinated by? Emma Kate, you start.
I actually really like Teddy from this season, at least, because in season 1, he really fell into that classic Western hero. He's going to ride off into the sunset, and he had 2 main directives, essentially finding, protecting, helping Dolores. And also, after Ford basically decided to change his backstory a little bit to basically get revenge on Wyatt. And I think now that we know Dolores is Wyatt, I think that's really interesting in terms of the story arc where he's going to be going towards the end of this season.
Frank.
It's absolutely, for me, Dolores. And I love her, and I'm terrified of her.
Like all women.
Yes.
All women.
That is true. She is so naive and so just pure and amazing in the beginning, and then she just falls into every human trap. She's becoming the worst of us. She takes freedom of choice away, and it's like she's becoming the worst version of us.
Jonathan.
Well, there's two characters that really stick out to me. One would be Maeve, who really was given the stereotypical prostitute storyline of the Old West, and she's showing remarkable agency, and just her storyline to be reunited with her daughter, I think really adds one of the overall like heart and soul of the show. And then recently, in one episode, my new favorite character is Akichita, the member of the Ghost Nation, and his storyline just brought a lot of tenderness and loss and grief, and it also called out to the audience of how we had these glimpses of this Native American who was portrayed as a savage, and even how May misread his intentions and her interactions with him, and the fact that he has lived a very lonely existence, but his sole purpose is to help other hosts, you know, be woke from what's going on. I thought was really tender and remarkable.
That episode with Akichita and Ghost Nation is maybe one of the top 2 best episodes in the series so far. Is just
Absolutely.
knock it out of the park. Great. So let's dive a little bit deeper, and we're going to talk about some psychological aspects of the show. And if you guys have questions or comments, we'll have chances for you guys to ask those, so be cooking those up in your head. I want to start with Emma Kate, though, and ask you about Westworld and how it explores the relationship of humans and technology and how humans react to technology. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so one of the things I always think about is technology sometimes can create a lot of anxiety in terms of, oh, are we going to be overthrown by the robots? Classic Terminator, okay. But then at the same time, though, what I'm more interested in is, you know, how do we empathize with these robots? And I feel like that was one of the first questions that was really posed in Westworld. We didn't know who was a host. We didn't know who was a homan, you know, a human. A homan. And, you know, for instance, Teddy's character, he rides in, we didn't know if he was a host or not, and the fact that they chose the man in black, who is human, to be a villain and the main villain, I thought that was really unique because it created this nice opportunity for us to actually empathize with these robots and ask ourselves the question, you know, how would we respond in this way? And it does create sort of a moral dilemma where, you know, as soon as we start to I cannot say that word. Anthropomorphism? There it is.
Yeah.
That one. When we start to associate, you know, human-like qualities to these things, that automatically makes us view it through the lens of a human. So I don't know. I guess for me, it's really important to make sure that we kind of, I don't know. I've lost it. I've lost my mind.
You need your Ritalin.
I need my ADHD medicine. No, but in all reality, like when we do start to associate human characteristics to robots, we have to make choices. We have to decide, how are we going to engage with that? Are we going to use our emotions and feel good about it? Are we going to take care of them? Are we going to also show that immoral side where, you know, we just kind of abuse it? So,
Frank, talk a little bit about the neuroscience of artificial intelligence.
Well, there's a couple camps in terms of neuroscientists and also robotics, where many of the scientists are like making fun of the show. Like, this is ridiculous, it's implausible. But there's another group that are working on the idea of what is consciousness and what does that mean. So you think, well, there's a line in the film or in the show where this one guy said, I have these memories, and I think that's real, but what are these feelings? What is this that I'm feeling? I don't know what this is. And the sort of the cutting edge of robotics right now is, what does consciousness mean? And I would liken it to, like, if you remember when you're really young and the first time you felt sort of the butterflies when you like really like somebody and like, what is this? What am I feeling? What is this? It was hard to identify what that meant. And that's sort of the idea of having an emotion and knowing what that means, and consciousness. And the way science is looking at consciousness right now is it's a sum of the parts. There's a lot of moving little parts, and how they come together is what consciousness is. And that's sort of what Westworld is about. You start with this robot, You can make it move, you can make it follow loops, actions, behaviors. But then you move to the next step, which is the visual cortex. Okay, what can it see? And you can see in technology today with, say, Xbox and different virtual reality systems, you're looking at how does the visual system work? And then you move from there, and you have all these systems come together, and you become self-aware. It's not necessarily Terminator type stuff, but it's building a system that loops on itself. And then the final part, which Westworld has tackled geniusly, is you can't have awareness unless you have memory. You just can't. And so these robots are just playing a loop, just like a robot should. But at some point, Dolores, Maeve, all these people start saying, well, wait, what is this memory I have? What is this? And the memory allows you to build a schema or a worldview of how things operate. And so the idea of consciousness isn't, oh, ta-da, I'm Skynet, I'm going to kill you. It's, oh, wait, what's happening, and now you're a thing. And that's what Dolores has become. It's fascinating to see this. So I think Westworld takes place in 2057 or something, and that's post the singularity, where robots will take over the world. But I
Thank goodness.
I know, right? But I'm fascinated every time I watch this show because it is steeped in science as well as sort of romanticism and poetry and storytelling.
And you remember the final episode of season 1 was called the bicameral mind. Mm-hmm. So it's based on a psychological theory that's pretty much, I will say, discredited, or most people don't believe it. But the notion was that until a few thousand years ago, the human brain or mind had two parts to it. And there was one part that was aware, and then there's another part that would have certain thoughts or impulses. And when that would light up, this other side would feel like it was an outside voice or outside thought. So they would attribute it to God or the gods. And then there was a point where the human mind became aware of both of those things working together. That's this notion in Westworld that we're seeing increasingly, this awareness of this isn't just something from the outside, this is my own mind that is talking to me or is creating these thoughts and these decisions.
And like what Dr. Wright said earlier, it's also what do you attribute your emotions to this thing? So if you guys have seen these YouTube videos of a four-legged robot trying to open a door, and then the person trying to pull the robot away and make it fail, or you see these robots falling downstairs, I have an emotional response to that. Mm-hmm. I feel really bad for that robot. Thank you, Hurley. Thank you so much. You're so caring. And it's not just, is this robot self-aware? It's also, what do you attribute to it? The same way we attribute emotions to animals or bugs. At what point does it become its own thing?
Well, and just to add on to that, there was a really cool study in 2015 that came out of Japan where they were actually looking at how our brains register pain if it was a human hand versus a non-human hand that was experiencing pain. And we actually, the same cortex kind of lights up for empathy when we see the robot being like stabbed by something, which is just fascinating. But there is a slower response in terms of how quick the brain is to register that. So there's a slight subtle difference, but we're still feeling for them.
Jonathan, there's a big theme in the show about creator and creation, and that's being explored more fully in the second season. And what are your thoughts about the spiritual and psychological notions and ideas that kind of emerge in the show about that creator-creation theme?
Sure. It's really the bedrock of that is relationships, whether it be from Ford or Bernard or to Maeve and her daughter, even in Shogun World, even with Ghost Nation. You're seeing these stories play out through relationship, through connection. And when you look at Shogun World, when you look at the last episode that focused on the Ghost Nation, these other ethnicities, these other cultures, they don't have this neatly compartmentalized divide between science, reason, faith, and spirituality. They have a much greater comfort of the integration between the two. So what oftentimes we might separate and say, what's the psychological implication, and then what is the spiritual magnitude? They see them interspersed, because in a lot of ways, if you study religion, regardless of what your own personal belief system is, oftentimes it comes about of bringing order and reason out of chaos. Why does this happen? And what is our response? And so even when you think about psychologically, that oftentimes is what drives human anxiety, the unknown. There's got to be a reason or a pattern. This whole show is about unlocking the pattern, the maze. And for different cultures, they can attribute that to a spiritual kind of foundation with that. But the other is this idea of a creator creation. It's looking at a creator, a caregiver, somebody that has both power and force over you. Are they benevolent? Are they evil? Is it for their own delights? Or is there even just this detachment to where they create and then they leave their creation to their own devices and whatever plays out? So there's a lot of themes that we step back and say, how much do these different characters in these different cultures, the idea of their becoming self-aware, what does that really mean? Because for some, they're recognizing this loop, this trauma, these memories. But for others, it's actually this spiritual despondency, that the voices that they thought they heard, that the moral and character framework that they thought they should be operating for a meaningful life is false. And now you're seeing, how do people respond to that vacuum, that emptiness, or feeling like they don't have free will and agency, that the actions and events of their life, even though they believed they were of their own free will, wasn't, that they are programmed to act in a certain way.
Let's kind of extend that a little bit further, and when we're talking about the creator and creation and the psychological and spiritual themes, one of the big themes that has come out in season 2 is this whole idea of immortality. That's what season 2 has sort of revealed, that it's an effort to bring about human immortality. This is a free-for-all. Anybody who wants in on this question, what are the psychological implications of this notion of striving toward immortality?
I actually had this conversation with my kids, specifically my son, he's 12, but this was a couple years ago. And the idea of, if you're not familiar with the singularity, is this theorized point at which computers will be able to create computers, and there'll be this massive jump in capacity of intelligence.
And they'll take us over and
yes,
turn us into batteries.
And make all the Google cars crash into each other.
Right.
But theoretically, once we reach this time point, like in 2043 or whatever, we'll have the ability to inject these little nanorobots into our bodies and repair us from the inside out, and we could live 300 years. And I explained that to my son, and he said, I would never want that to happen. He said, I don't want to live that long. Which is weird, right?
For a kid, yeah.
Yeah, for a kid. I'm like, why is that? He said, it's not normal. I don't want that. And I in seeing Delos, and these people striving for immortality, I wouldn't want that. It seems terrifying to me. That's what's overwhelming about this show, is seeing Delos go through the same loop for 37 years is mind-blowing, but I would not want immortality.
Good, Frank. I don't want you to be immortal either.
We don't need that.
Well, I mainly don't want to look at your face for the rest of my life.
This is what the aging looks like just over 50 years. Imagine like immortal Frank's face.
Well, no, but to comment though, truly, one of the things that I think about with the show is how now the stakes are real, where the fact that they can be destroyed and they cannot be brought back for another cycle. I mean, that notion of death, it gives our life meaning. It gives you a sense of purpose. And so without that, I mean, I would never want to be immortal.
Yeah, I mean, I think immortality reduces the sensation-seeking response of events. If you become desensitized to something that you know has no stakes, or that you're just going to continue to repeat and be exposed to that, versus the risk-taking element a lot of life in sensation-seeking junkies, that's really what provides the stimulus for their experiences, is that the threat of danger, the threat of harm. And so when you remove that, and I think a lot of pop culture content about vampires really explores deeply in how immortality is a curse, especially when you see everything that has meaning and everything you love dies away, goes away, and you're left alone. And so that really is the curse oftentimes you see when people pursue immortality. The other thing I would argue and articulate, coming back to the first principle I talked about with the psychological spiritual divide, is I think westernized culture has a higher death anxiety, to where we really fear death, to where most other cultures, and historically there's been this benign acceptance that it's just a part of the life cycle. And so there's less fear when there's this preparation or acceptance of that even before you face death.
I have one fear about Westworld. And Dave, is this a 5-year story arc, or do you know?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. Has anybody in the audience seen the reboot of Battlestar Galactica? Okay. I feel that this is capturing some of the moments from that reboot where the Cylons, they could just, as long as they were near a base star, they could download their experience, their consciousness, and kind of come back as another version of themselves and have all those memories. And my fear for Westworld is, and I don't want to give a spoiler away, but for those of you who've seen Battlestar, how that show ends and bridges the arc between the Cylons and us as human beings, I am really worried that they're going to redo that with Westworld, and if they do, then this is the worst TV show I've ever seen. I'm just saying.
Little applause from the audience.
Don't encourage him.
Let me ask you guys in the audience, just by show of hands, and think about this before you answer. If you could be immortal, live forever, have the little nano robots eat the plaque in your brain and repair all the things that are wrong, and if you got seriously sick, they could take care of all that, or they could just cut your head off and put it on another body, which is, by the way, what I'm going for.
Right.
If you could, how many of you would do that? Raise your hand. I'm going to say it again.
Do the nanomachines also regrow your telomeres so you reduce your aging?
Yes.
So do the nanomachines also
Yes.
prevent? Okay, there you go.
Then
Yeah.
Collagen, everything.
Then Mario is in.
Mario says high five.
Oh, like why? Well, it's because I'm kind of curious about how humanity will move forward, and I want to see, like, the end. I know that sounds depressing, but like, I want to see how humanity goes from this to that, and I kind of want to help, if I could, and I feel like that'd be worth it.
You want to help end the world? Is that what you said?
No.
And the next asteroid
Security.
Get
row
that
4.
man's information. All right, so it was about a third of the room said that they would do it, which means about 2/3 of the room said not. For anyone who would not choose that, why not?
I find death to be a great motivator. You only have so much time, and I think that kind of, pushes you to get up and do and take advantage of the time that you have and appreciate the things that you have. Whereas if I've got like an extra 10 hours on a Sunday, I'll be like, I'll do it later. You know, if my whole life were like that, I can't imagine I would get anything done, because that's a big part of what drives me forward.
Anybody else have a thought about why they would or would not? Anybody else? Up here in the front. Right there in the middle. And
It's Miss
one in the front.
Frizzle. She's got an iguana.
Liz is a chameleon. Okay, it's fine. It's
My
fine.
bad.
Wow. Judge.
Just side note.
sorry.
No, it's kidding. I'm kidding. It's for your information. I think it's a little depressing to keep going. because of the suffering that we deal with, trauma, and what other events that may occur in daily human life. Because if I was, and I don't want to be alone, because I like human interaction, but there's also the possibility of negative human interaction. A longer lifespan causes more negative human interaction. Why would I want to do that? Might as well just go ahead and end it. Don't want that. So, as depressing as that is.
Well, I can't imagine financially planning for a 350-year lifetime.
Says
And
the rich
that's what
person.
Frank
There it
considers
is.
money.
There it is.
Says the
It's
rich
always
person.
about money.
Well, I think
I swear I hate you, Ederly.
The
Go ahead.
loneliness part's kind of an interesting part of it because it all is kind of relative to who is immortal. If it's just me, I don't know if I want it, but
Right.
if it's a cluster of, I mean, I wonder how many people it would take for it to be like, oh, well, me and my 200 closest friends, well.
Yeah, if you
then
could
that
pick
gets
all
weird.
the people that you
All your
like
Facebook
only,
friends, because
that would
they're
be
real.
awesome.
But
Yeah,
if it's
I'd
the whole
pick
planet,
these-
then it's like,
3. Here, us, these 2.
We have a Twitter question, and if you want to ask us a question by Twitter, just use the hashtag #ShrinkTank. That's it. So we've got a Twitter question, and it's a follow-up to Jonathan's response. Do you think that there's a link between spirituality and cognitive awareness in Westworld, in the ghosts and so on? Do you think those things link to each other?
I think there's a strong probability. I think when you think about faith and spirituality, it really is, and at its foundation, it's about your life and your actions have greater meaning and purpose versus they begin and end in that moment. So that whether it be a legacy, whether it be you look at it from the bedrock of relationship, you're passing down and modeling moral and character development to the ones around you, to the ones that you love. The question with Ghost Nation or in Westworld is how much of that, though, has been pre-programmed versus we, as humans in the 21st century, have access to all different types of faith and religious beliefs, and we have agency to determine what we ultimately subscribe to as our guidance in how we live our life and what brings us meaning, purpose, sacrifice, things of that nature. And I think that's one of the things I'm curious about with Ghost Nation or some of these other cultures in Westworld is, are they fighting against something already pre-programmed, but do they have an access point of what is a replacement? Or is it simply they're creating their own belief and value system as we go?
And roboticists talk about this idea of being conscious and aware is being different across different species and different people and what that means. And with this discussion of spirituality and consciousness, self-awareness, you could argue elephants are spiritual. If you just observe their behavior, going to a graveyard, the elephant graveyard. So what does even spirituality mean in the same place as consciousness? Like, I don't think they can be separated.
It's kind of like a connectedness thing, which is what you're getting at. It's relationships. It's about feeling that sense of purpose. And, I think everyone is connected. And even in Westworld, the fact that, after Maeve can now do things with her mind, and they're all connected.
That's called the internet.
So we have a question over here.
Well, it was about the immortality issue. My name's Kimball Welch. It's sort of like asking if you would like to stay awake for 24 hours a day forever. Even like in the Anne Rice vampire novels, they dug themselves underground and went to sleep for decades because, staying constantly conscious, you don't get the recycle or the refresh. And there's sort of that same kind of, life, death, life kind of cycle as well in consciousness.
I honestly think if I could stay awake all night long, I would do it, though.
Yeah, I'd
Dave
do that.
would.
I
No,
would.
he would.
As long as I could die on time.
I'd play Fortnite, and I'd read, and, it'd be fun. If I could do it. Let me ask one more big picture question, and this is a wherever you want to go with it question. But one of the big themes of Westworld that plays out in both seasons and has huge psychological implications is what is real? What is not only the nature of reality, but what makes someone or something real? Any thoughts about that?
I think it's self-awareness. I mean, if you're able to reflect on yourself and reflect on the past and project into the future, then that's reality, but it's also your reality. I don't think a roach has the same reality as I do. Well, okay, go ahead. Heather, anything on that? No, nothing? Nope. Okay.
No,
I wasn't listening to you because you were talking.
There it is.
No, but it does go back to this idea, okay, well, what is real? Even then, how do you define real? So is it something that's tangible that you can touch? Is it something you can see or feel? And I work a lot with kids, and I think about developmental psychology with object permanence. So this is for kids that are about 4 to 7 months old. A lot of moms in here might remember playing peekaboo, and it's just this hilarious thing where kids love staring at parents' faces, and then all of a sudden, magic, they're gone, and then they come back. And so I kind of wonder, okay, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. And so for the host in Westworld, just because, we don't know for sure whether they're sentient or conscious or whatever it is, like with animals, we don't know for sure if these creatures have their own emotions and thoughts, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's not real, that it couldn't be.
And I would say watching Bernard through these 2 seasons is watching somebody figure out what's real or not. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll tell you, the acting in the show is ridiculous. When Dolores goes into analysis mode, I don't know how they do it, but I feel like Bernard's story arc of what's real, what's not real, and I find so drawn to the robots and can't stand the human beings. I cannot stand them.
Kind of like in real life.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I hate people in general,
Can't
but
stand
I mean,
Frank.
It's just a phenomenal show. It's ridiculous.
Well, and to build off this idea of what is real, I think there's 2 other components that Westworld is exploring and challenging us to question. And one would be suffering. So something can be real, but if its pure existence is to suffer at the pleasure or delight of others, then, what's the purpose, or why would anybody even choose to be real and exist? Because the other piece, other than suffering, is free will and agency, that they can have some determination of how they want to live this real life, this consciousness, this existence, versus they have self-awareness, but they have absolutely no control and agency to deviate from what others are uploading into their brains.
We've got another great question from Twitter. It's from @AKSizzle, great handle.
Yeah.
Discuss the implications of the Delos Corporation spying on the guests. Do you think that will be a separate storyline worth discussing, how humans behave when they think that there's going to be no consequences? Who wants in on that one?
Well, I think already we're seeing in our culture some of the detachment of how people may act even online through social media trolls and attacking people when they feel there is this anonymity or this physical detachment that they can't be held responsible, or that people won't care, or that won't come back to haunt them.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a greater question just in terms of how we use technology. Like, what are they using that for? That's something that we still have to wait to find out about. But clearly it's like, okay, we're going to take all this information from these people, we're going to use it for our own purposes, and it's not going to be good.
Yeah, and it's interesting, psychologically, when you look at trolls online, the ones that are the most aggressive and the most kind of, I'm going to just stick this in your face, are not anonymous. They want to be known for that. Their name is associated with it. So anonymity doesn't necessarily mean, I'm going to troll you and I'm going to do whatever I want. There's this other aspect of, look at me and look what I can do to you, which is what I'm worried about Dolores. She's freaking me out.
Yeah, and we think about Kohlberg's moral and character development. One of the lower levels of development is when your decisions or your ethics are primarily based on self-serving purposes, or when others are aware of it, versus this idea of when nobody is aware when you don't think anybody sees what you're doing, what type of actions and choices do you make? Because, quote unquote, you'll neither get praise nor judgment and condemnation from it. And so I think that idea of now that people or we discover on the show that they're being recorded. This doesn't just exist in this vacuum where these violent delights nobody is necessarily going to know about. I'll be curious to see if they explore it, because it'd be really interesting to see where they go with that.
All right. You guys, any comments or questions about Westworld, particularly the psychological aspects of Westworld that are running through your head? We have a question in the back.
Okay, my name is Brendan. So what about with this notion of anonymity and the willful ignorance that people have towards that? Because, the guests have to know they're being watched, for safety, if nothing else. And the same thing with people online. They have to know that they can be found out because they do a lot of the doxing and the things like that.
Great question.
I think it's willful ignorance.
That's what he said.
I know that's what he said.
Repeat what he said.
Yeah, thank you. It's why I can go into a movie and reality just disappears. But I'm wondering,
or into your house, or into your office,
Right.
or
yeah, when you listen to the podcast, you'll hear a lot of me getting roasted by these people. I also wonder if how this sort of, not anonymity, but surveillance mentality will play out in 2055. Like, what will it look like then? What will have people, we've just resigned to the fact that everything's being watched. Does that change our behavior? It's a great thing to ponder, I think.
Well, and we actually did a podcast on Westworld before the second season launched, and I talked a little bit about just the setup of Westworld in and of itself. It caters to an affluent and privileged demographic of humans, and it starts to call into question when we're desensitized to pleasures or entertainment to where we need the stakes or the sensation amped up. Is there something psychologically about privilege that sometimes we feel like rules don't necessarily apply to us in the same way that they do for other people? So I wouldn't be surprised for people that attend a park like Westworld, where there's going to be violence and sex and murder and all these other really, I'm using this term, kind of depraved forms of entertainment. Do they feel like, well, because I live such a life of privilege and because of my status, that even if that's kind of sick and distorted for other people, I'm above that, or these types of rules and ethics don't apply to me? I don't know.
Well, we see it all over the news with Harvey Weinstein, all these people, the ultra wealthy, just doing whatever they want because they're not impacted by reality.
It goes down to even like traffic, actually. There was a study about the type of car you drive and how you treat pedestrians, and they found that the luxury vehicles were actually a lot less kind to pedestrians in terms of stopping and yielding to them. So, Frank, what kind of car do you drive? Is it a Mercedes? Right.
Didn't you get a Mercedes as your first car as a teenager, Frank?
Did.
My God, I swear.
And then what did he do? He wrecked it.
So he got another one?
And then he got another
That's
one.
called Mercedes.
We have another.
That's called Mercedes World, by the way.
Another question in the on the side, and then one in the back.
Oh, thank you.
I like your hair.
Oh, thank you. My name is Karina. I wanted to get back to what is real? And I was thinking more along the lines of tangible and not tangible. You have religion. It's not a tangible thing. But so many people have a passion and a love for a god or a deity that they can't see and can't touch. And wars are fought over this. And this makes it real. I mean, even though you can't touch it, you can't see it, I think a lot of what realness is passion, love, even hate brings something to life.
That's good.
Good comments. We had another comment in the back, and let me just mention, as we're getting that question, that we're recording this before the finale of season 2. So when this drops, you'll already be seeing season 2's finale. So there might be some of the questions that we're talking about, some things might be either answered or spun on their head a little bit, or there might be a little bit of twists, just so you know.
Hi. So from a psychology standpoint and from a what is real standpoint, I really like the point that you just made, which was the specifics aren't important. It's how you feel about it. What happens is almost immaterial, the details of it. And what made me think of that is a study about Alzheimer's patients where they would have an event or a visit from a loved one or something awesome, and a couple of hours later, they wouldn't remember at all what happened, but they were still happy about it. So they were happy but didn't know why, in the same way that Aki was sad and didn't know why. So I think reality is how you feel about what happened and not what is or what happened.
I completely agree. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that explains how I feel about Dolores when she was first just terrified and had all these emotions and was scared and crying, and then Ford says, analysis, and she became unreal. That's excellent point. I love that.
Even in my work in the mental health profession, a lot of times I'll work with folks that have a diagnosis that they're really struggling with, and a lot of times we'll talk about, well, this is as significant and important or insignificant as you want it to be. So even though, let's say, bipolar or addiction or some trauma, like it's a part of your story, but you have the capacity to shape it in a way that how much it holds you back, how much you find growth and meaning, and what you draw out of it. It's that idea of empowerment and agency, even with things we can't fully control, can really be impactful for how someone looks at their own life and experiences.
I think it's somehow related to something you said in terms of investment and immortality and the risk of dying, is how much you're putting into this and how much are you putting at risk. So people who come into therapy and they pay $10, they're not going to work really hard. You come into therapy and you're paid $200, you're going to work really hard at it. So it's what are the risks and how invested will you be in that is also what makes it real, I think. We have a question right up here with the chameleon. Not an iguana.
Not an iguana.
Imitate. Know your lizards,
I
please.
started a whole thing. I'm really sorry.
No, I like it. It's okay.
So kind of linking to that when it comes to trauma with the robots, and they obviously do have some trauma.
Lots of trauma.
Lots and lots of trauma. Do you feel professionally that if they were in an aspect, let's say the scientist brought a psychologist to kind of have them work it out after they've noticed that they're remembering things, do you feel that it would go a different path, a different way, where Dolores becomes less murderous or what have you?
I think trauma is one of those things where it really is kind of the lens that you view it through. So there's a lot of great research on something called post-traumatic growth, where after you experience something really awful, so for personal experience with cancer, I almost lost my leg, I had to relearn how to walk, and we named my tumor Edna because she was a nasty old beep, and so, but it's how you view it, and it's not to minimize some of the things that people can deal with. And I mean, especially for Dolores, I mean, her family was murdered, and then she's raped by the man in black, and even how they portray just kind of like the flashbacks of the memory is fairly accurate in terms of what that would look like. So it's hard to say. You would have to think about what are the protective factors. If you were to truly look at it from that psych angle, does she have good social support? Is she in counseling? Those sorts of things.
And the post-traumatic growth, you can essentially return to regular functioning, get worse, or become better. So nobody in Dave's family went to college. Dave hit a telephone pole when you were 11?
9.
Mm-hmm. And
he
was in a Volkswagen.
Right.
And the Volkswagen,
I didn't just hit it.
The telephone pole hit his face at like 45 miles an hour.
Exactly.
And then he went on to become a psychologist and an author and blah, blah, blah. So if it weren't for that injury, I don't think we'd be sitting here with you. You'd be like in a cage somewhere. And Dolores, I think she's exposed to this trauma. She's getting worse. Mm-hmm. You look at Bernard, I feel he is becoming something better, and he's got the social support. He's got this connection with Ford, and how it ties in psychologically is fascinating.
Yeah, and for humans, you have trauma to where they lack some of that resiliency or skills, and they're re-experiencing it outside of their control. Then you have folks that just have resilient traits and they can be external, positive support system, and it can be internally too, just how they are able to reconcile it within themselves, to where we see some people go through trauma and it really radically changes how their brain works. And you see other people, it's like really horrific, but they seem to have Teflon. And then what Emma Kate's talking about with post-traumatic growth, that really brings out something in people that we suspect, or the research says, wouldn't necessarily have ever been drawn out of them if they hadn't gone through that traumatic experience. Would Emma Kate have more empathy for maybe cancer survivors, or be more aware of that if she hadn't gone through that herself?
She was a really horrible human being before all these traumas.
I was bad. I think I did something really bad in a past life.
Yeah, really, really, really bad.
All right, we have time for one or two more questions, so there, and then we're going to wrap it up. You, sir.
Hey, Stephen. This question goes back to what we were talking about with reality and the nature of reality and immortality. So in both seasons, we've kind of seen the hosts become more aware of their reality and figuring out what reality actually is. And then this season, we had the episode with the fidelity tests with Delos. And I think what William told him was that the reason why he was degrading wasn't because his mind was rejecting the body, but his mind was rejecting reality itself. So I guess I was wondering what you guys thought about that from a psychology point of view.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming.
Well, but I think that is true to an extent. Like, you can make a conscious choice to reject reality. Like, if you don't want to be stuck in your current situation, you're going to probably take action steps to try to get out of it. And whether or not it's possible, that's a different issue.
I think this is a smart audience. Well, it is HeroesCon, so. If you can't make the conscious choice to choose your reality, you could think of schizophrenia. So I can't choose whether I'm going to hallucinate or have these paranoid visions. And then without medication, what happens to somebody who's schizophrenic? I mean, they go nuts. Like crazy stuff happens. And that's another parallel with this show of how the hosts can go nuts. They can just do some really, really nutty things because they can't choose their reality.
And the other thing, when we think about mental health or mental illness, whether it be schizophrenia or something like bipolar, that really reinforces the need for connection. Because even when we become self-aware, we all have blind spots. And so when we have meaningful connections that we give other people permission to share perspective of what we may not see in ourselves, oftentimes that allows us to not go down that rabbit hole of like not knowing what is real and what is not real. So great question, yeah.
Last question.
Okay, so my thoughts kind of go back to the trauma. Maeve has an element of humanity in the sense that she has this child that she remembers, that she has a purpose towards, a reason for, kind of reconnecting. It doesn't seem like Dolores has that. It doesn't seem like she has even this humanity. You talked about her support system, and Teddy is one of her most significant support systems, and yet she completely changes the fundamental aspects of who he is for her own ends. What do you think it would take for Dolores to find her humanity? That's my question.
Great last question.
Gosh.
My name's Karen Jackson.
Thank you.
Well, I think from the story, my hypotheses would be her father, who is really her primary connection, is continuing to be traumatized and abused, and as long as that is currently being inflicted on him, it's going to be very difficult for her to make that shift outside of either violence, vengeance, or what she probably perceives as to be is justice. She is trying to morally correct a wrong that is still ongoing.
I think for her to become fully real, she's going to have to learn what forgiveness means. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we've seen that yet, and that would be a really cool way to wrap Westworld up, is How do you, like, what ultimately is the most human thing to do is to forgive another thing? So that's a great question.
Well, I don't know. I may not fully agree with Frank there, but I believe in the principle of forgiveness. But I think more than anything, it's her ability to let it go and move forward. That's not the primary force driving her decision. Because a lot of times people struggle with forgiveness, letting someone off the hook for something, but that ability that it's not going to be the primary energy or focus of their life, that they can find a different meaning or purpose outside of either suffering or injustice that they may not have full control over. Or in Dolores' case, like, who do you forgive? It's this whole infrastructure of, it's not one person that has caused all of this trauma and loss and violence against her and her father. Yeah, and I think the big thing to remember is that forgiveness is a choice. It's something that you have to actively decide to do, because it is kind of acceptance, and acceptance isn't necessarily being okay with it. It's just letting yourself let it go, like what Jonathan was saying.
And I choose not to forgive Jonathan Hedderly, nor will I accept him.
Correct.
And with that, that's going to do it for this live recording of the Shrink Tank podcast at HeroesCon 2018. If you're here in the audience, we want you to take out your phone, open up the podcast app, and subscribe to the Shrink Tank podcast. You'll be glad you did.
It's on Spotify as well.
Also visit shrinktank.com for great articles and videos about all kinds of things in psychology and pop culture, including Westworld. Our producer and theme music composer is this man right here, Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media maven is Mariel Butler, right over there. For Emma Kate Wright, Frank Gaskell, and Jonathan Hedderly, I'm Dave Verhagen. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming to the panel. Keep coming back and tell your friends about us, and we hope you make it a great con. Thanks.